So this is the PowerPoint outline or rough draft of my final research paper by yours truly. Part 1 of the research paper, which is the introduction to everything. So the issue I have chosen is, what is the effect of violence in video games on those who play them? Why am I interested in this issue? So I have always found this issue a little interesting. When I was younger, video games were important to myself as well as my friends growing up. Just like any kid around pre-teenage. Some of my friends and I went on to live some different lives, and I've always been curious to know if video games did play a part in that. When I was growing up, I played both non-violent video games as well as violent video games, and ended up with no major run-in with the law. But I also had friends who played only violent video games that had some brushes with the law. It's just always been an interesting point to see if video games had anything to do with how they turned out. So some might not find this issue as important as I do, but coming from a criminal justice background, it'd be nice to know the relationship between violent video games and violent crimes. See if researchers can kind of figure out if there's a scientific backing to all that, and also as well as to just, stop violent crimes from happening in general. So now we move into part 2 of the research paper. The first disciplinary cluster is going to be social sciences. So the first article I'll be using is out of the Journal of Communication by Christopher Ferguson, and he wrote, "Does media violence predict societal violence?" So the central question of this article is obviously, does media violence predict societal violence, as stated in the title of the article. How does this article help answer my question? So it discusses 2 studies that were done regarding different types of media, and those different types of media were movies, television shows, as well as video games. The first study was they looked at violent TV shows and violent movies in the 20th and 21st century, as well as the crime rate during that same time span. The second study, they researched 2-decade-long study looking at the relationship between the amount of video games played by youths as well as the violent offenses committed by youth offenders. The second article I'll be discussing is out of the book, "Does Playing Video Games Make Players More Violent?" So in chapter 2, the author discusses how much exposure do children have to violence in video games. The central question, again, how much violence are children exposed to during playing video games? How does this article help answer my question? The author discusses how much violence a child sees throughout the course of certain video games as opposed to just seeing violence in general. It also discusses how much violence is too much violence in a video game, and should there be a standard. Also discusses a younger generation as opposed to an older generation playing, and that's because at a younger age you're a little more impressionable than you are at an older age. The next article is called "Video Games and Crime" by Michael Ward. The central question of this is, do violent video games create a violent and antisocial attitude? Again, how does this article help answer my question. So the author talks about the type of video games kids play and whether or not they're altering the attitude of the person that's playing the game. He also compares playing video games to other activities that youth are participating, such as organized sports or playing outside. So moving on to natural sciences as the second disciplinary cluster. So the first article I'll be discussing in natural sciences is out of Human Brain Mapping by Klaus Matthiek and Renee Weber. And the central question in this article is, do violent video games alter brain activity? So how does this article help answer my question is, what they did is that they did a study of 13 video game players, all right in the ages of 18 to 26 years old, who played roughly 14 hours a week. And it was discovered that when the video games consisted of more violence than normal, the subjects had some abnormal brain activity. But what I really liked about this study is that they compared, they used different variables. So they compared different types of video games, different graphics, as well as volume, so high, low. The next article is out of the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, called "This Is Your Brain on Violent Video Games." Kind of a funny wordplay on "This Is Your Brain on Drugs." But as you can see, several different authors helped in this one. So the central question of this article is, what effects do violent and non-violent images have on an individual's brain activity? So while they do still touch on playing video games, they also touch on television shows as well as movies. So how does this article help answer my question? The authors did a study by taking a group of people and subjected them to both violent and non-violent video games, as well as violent and non-violent images, and measured their brain activity. And then after the subjects have seen both images, they were made to listen to a loud, annoying noise, and their aggression was measured. Obviously, I'll go into more detail during the paper. Don't want to give too much away right now, but I really enjoyed this study. So I have another article out of the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. Again, a few different authors. But we've seen Brad Bushman before in the previous article. This one's a little different. The central question of this one is, do individuals' past media habits have an effect on the way they perceive violent images? So I like this one because it kind of goes back into their history and what they've done prior. So how this article helped answer my question? What the researchers did was they took individuals and had them fill out a media questionnaire about their past video game habits. They made the individuals play roughly 20 minutes of a violent video game and then had them watch a 10 minutes of real life violence while monitoring their heart rate. After that, they compared the heart rates between the individuals who had played a lot of violent video games in the past to some that were a little less experienced, and ended up realizing that the people who had played a lot of violent video games in the past were not as affected by the people who hadn't played as much video games in the past. Again, I will get into a little more detail during the paper. So that's the end of my outline. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation and liked the research topic I chose. I look forward to hearing your feedback. Any comments are great. I'm always looking, obviously, to improve upon this.